Morrow. Today is May 31st, 2006, and we are at the parlor of the First Presbyterian Church. And Mr. Morrow, we appreciate you coming and volunteering to interview for the Mooresville Museum. We know that you have been a lifelong resident of Mooresville, and we'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your experiences growing up, and also your family was the owners of Safety Chevrolet, so we'd like for you to tell us about that too.
Okay. I was born in Mooresville and lived on East Center Avenue from the time I was born until I left to go to college, on the corner of East Center and Rankin Street. The house is still there. My daughter lives there now with her family and husband. And as a child, I played with kids that lived along the first block of Magnolia Street in what is now the Mooresville High School location. That was just one big open field, and we played there a lot. And the Ralph Sloop family lived next door to us on the west, between us and the old hospital building. And they operated a grocery store, you may recall. First, they operated it in the back porch of their house, and then later they built a separate building for that store. And they had a lot of old children who were older than me and who were my unofficial babysitters when I was a little kid. And our house at that time was the last house going out East Center, I think. I don't remember anything past it until you got out into the country, maybe where the Harris Dairy is or something like that, or Harris Dairy was. East Center was paved to the end of that block that we lived on, and from there on it was dirt. And it went out and met the Cottle Creek Road, which I think was also dirt. And of course a lot of the streets in town were dirt as well then. In my neighborhood were a handful of children my own age, but mostly they were older. I was pretty much the youngest kid around for a long time. We were only 2 houses away from the old Lawrence Hospital, so that was kind of interesting because you could hear all kinds of ambulances and noises day and night. Of course, the windows were open with no air conditioning, as at the hospital as well as at our house. And one of the interesting things that I remember doing was one of the Sloop children, whose name was Max, used to take a cart with cold drinks, Pepsis, Cokes, Dr. Peppers, that sort of thing, crackers, peanuts, and snacks, and roll it through the old hospital 2 times a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, because the hospital had no vending machines. And when you went to the hospital back then, you apparently were kind of pretty much on your own once you got in your room. But a couple times a day, and he used to take me with him, and a couple times a day we'd roll that cart through the old hospital and sell drinks and crackers and snacks, chewing gum, to the people that were patients in the hospital. And what's really the interesting thing is that we sold an enormous amount of cigarettes to people that were lying there sick in bed. I've always thought that was, looking back, that was kind of goofy. Yeah. But there were people lying up there who could barely breathe, and they would buy 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and we'd sell them to them. I went to the Mooresville schools. I went to South School, which is the building, which was the building on the corner of South Church Street and East Center Avenue, and is no longer there. Although the cafeteria is still there, and it is the fellowship building for the Baptist Church. Went to South School for 6 years. Then went to the old Mooresville High School. At that time, the junior high was also combined with it, so from grades 7 through 12, I was at that building, which was over on West Moore Avenue and is no longer there. And Enjoyed South School very much, had quite a few interesting teachers. Interesting thing was that I think out of my teachers at South School, probably 4 of them went to the same church I did, so they could keep my parents informed on what my conduct was like. And also in high school, I guess quite a few of those teachers were members of our church as well. I especially remember Miss Cora Fries in high school, because she taught my class actually for parts of 2 years in high school, both grades 7 and 8. She always said she moved up with us. She was a member of the same church that we belonged to, First Presbyterian Church. She was never married, owned a big house on South Main Street, and was very generous in making her house available to some people who would not have been able to stay around Mooresville if they had not been able to stay with her. And I remember specifically that she kept one young man who was attending Davidson and let him live in her house while he was there. And she was always very generous with everything. And school teachers, of course, were not paid a lot of money back in those days, but I do know that she gave away a lot of what she did have in the form of scholarships, one here at Presbyterian Church and several others. She was very generous with her time and with her assets. I guess other than Miss Cora Fries, the high school teacher or individual that had a big impact on me was Robert Klepfer, who was the band director. He came to Mooresville when I was in the 5th grade, and he started kids playing in the band in the 5th grade. And by the time I got to junior high, we had a junior band as well as the senior high band. And he came to Mooresville from a band program in Lenore, North Carolina, where they had a very good band, a very impressive program. After he came here, within a couple of years, he had developed a band program here, a musical program here that was recognized around the region and respected. And we always had a good band, in my opinion, while he was here. And I respected the fact that he spent a lot of time working with the band and the chorus. We had, during football season, drills at 7:30 in the morning before school to get a drill ready. We had a fresh drill ready for every game during the football season. And we did them all from memory. We did not carry any music with us. And I just always thought Bob Klepfer was just a real asset to this community. Interesting person, very influential. Principal of the high school, Jack Scott, who we talked about earlier, is also very influential. He had a tough job and did it well. And I enjoyed my time in the Mooresville schools. I always felt that Mooresville having a small school system meant that people of all social groups and all economic groups were mixed together in the same school system, and to me that was an asset. I think that's something that perhaps is missing from some schools nowadays. Although at that time our schools were not integrated and we did not have minority people in our school system. But other than that, there was quite a mix of all kinds of people in the Mooresville school system, and I think that was an asset to the community to have that.
Okay, and your father started the Safety Chevrolet Company, is that correct?
He did. He had worked with a Mr. Birdsell, who had a car dealership for several years as a bookkeeper and general manager. And then when Mr. Birdsell decided to leave the car business, my father got the Chevrolet franchise from Mooresville in sometime in 1935, and I don't know exactly which month it was. I believe it was October, but I'm not sure about that. He had two other partners, a Mr. Dickinson, who was an active partner, and a Mr. Frank Ward, who was a silent partner and financial participant. And within a few years of starting the dealership, probably within 3 or 4 years, my father and Mr. Dickinson bought out Mr. Ward's share, and then shortly after that, Mr. Dickinson left to move to Georgia to go into some other kind of business. And I think around 1939, my father was joined in the business by his younger brother, Jim Morrow. And they were together in that business until my father retired, I believe, in late 1960. And then Jim Morrow and his son and I were in the business from 1960 to 1965, when his son, Jim Morrow Jr., left us. And so it was my Uncle Jim and I until 1983. At that point, Jim Morrow retired, and I bought out his share, and I operated it through 1988 as Morrow Chevrolet. And that was an interesting experience of almost 30 years in the car business. We had lots of great customers and lots of great people that I worked with during that period of time. It was a lot of fun.
And where was your Safety Chevrolet dealership located?
It was at a couple of buildings on Broad Street, and the numbering on Broad Street's sort of disorganized in that block, but it was 132 to 156, I think, were the numbers that we had, because we had two buildings. The main building was 156, which is next to the Mooresville Ice Cream Company, and the other building is down the street, which in an old location which had formerly been a livery stable and later a furniture warehouse, and then was later used as our body shop. That older building goes back, I believe, to sometime in the early 1890s. At least part of that building does. It was originally a livery stable. It also had been a car dealership at some time or other too, and then was a furniture warehouse until around 1949 or 1950, and that's when the Chevrolet company bought it for use as a body shop. And today it has been an antique store and several other things in recent years.
Well, Bill, the Chevrolet company then was in business during the Second World War. How did the war impact the dealership?
It was a pretty severe impact. Obviously, after early 1942, there were no more cars or trucks manufactured for civilian use. All of the assets of General Motors and Ford and Chrysler and all of the big automakers were turned toward war production. So car dealerships had to rely on service and parts business for the years 1942 through probably early 1946, when production started up again. And it was tough because there were no new cars for sale, and even used cars were somewhat controlled under the old rationing program. And I don't remember exactly how that worked, but there were certain priorities of people that had first chance at any used car that a dealer might have available. Doctors, nurses, public officials. There were certain folks who, under the rationing system, had first choice to buy whatever used cars there were, and of course there weren't very many. So it was tough. And I know that at one point, in order for the business to have some cash flow to keep it going through the war, my father was in the process when the war began of purchasing the building, and in order to increase cash flow, they sold the building to someone else and rented it during the war. And then at the end of the war, they bought it back from that person and owned it again. But it was tough. And of course, all businesses lost a lot of employees too, because a lot of employees got drafted and were in the military. So you had a loss of business as well as a loss of employees.
Your new cars were primarily delivered by truck. Did some of them also come in by rail?
They did. Actually, we did not begin getting cars by truck until sometime during the middle 50s to late 50s. Yeah, they came in and were put on the rail siding, and they had some special box cars that had 2 racks inside of the box car, and when they loaded those box cars, they could put 2 cars on these racks, and then the cars were raised on these racks up near the ceiling, and then 2 other cars were put in underneath them. So you had 4 cars in each box car. And it was our job to get them out when they got here, and that was tough because there was no power equipment involved. Those racks had some big chain pulleys that you had to when you finished unloading the cars, you were required to run those racks all the way back to the top, and it was my job to pull that rack back up to the top, which took a long time.
I don't remember what year it was, but I remember sometime as a kid there was a train derailment south of town down about Waterlyn. And there was some automobiles involved in that.
Yeah, there sure were. I recall that. I don't think we had any cars on that train, but there was quite a lot of damage. I do remember that. That would have been sometime in the 50s, early 60s.
Talking about damage, there was a fire. Wasn't there a major fire at the Chevrolet company at some?
Sure did. Yeah, we had a fire in the early morning hours of early January 1964, I guess it was, due to an electrical fire that started in an air compressor, and it burned the back 2/3 of the dealership. Was pretty much totally gutted. The walls are still standing, of course, because they were brick masonry, 2 or 3 layers thick, but all the wood part, the roof, the floor, windows, woodwork, things of that nature were all burned out. Had to rebuild that back part of the dealership, and that's where the surge department was located.
Let me ask you about a particular Chevrolet that I remember as a kid. Mr. Nat Johnston, who was with the Johnson grocery store and oil and heat, whatever. His wife, Miss Mary, his second wife, she drove an old model Chevrolet for years and years and years. It was really an antique. What model car was that? You know?
It was. I remember that car. It was green.
Yep.
It was and shiny. I think it was probably a 1928, 29, or 30. I think it was 28 or 29. Pretty sure of that. Yeah, she drove that car around town for years, and of course everybody wanted that car. I believe when she was no longer able to drive it, she sold it to a nephew.
She kept it for years because I know that when she got rid of that car, she still drove for a little while, and she drove I think a 55 Chevrolet. So
That's probably right. So,
it was a real antique.
Yeah, it was.
You always recognize it around town.
Lots of people wanted that car. It was nice. It was very clean.
Let me ask you something about your mother. I know she was a real good cook. Tell us her involvement with, I'll say, civic organizations and this sort of thing, and where they met.
That was that was an outcome of the war as well, and it was completely accidental. I'm glad you asked about that because I hadn't thought about that.